Hi, I'm Joe Beck, and welcome to our little video here. I'd like to talk a little bit about what guitar and music in general is to me. I feel that the guitar has always been, for me, a combination of a piano and a saxophone. I've never looked at it as a guitar. The music is the goal for me, not the notes and getting a lot of notes out or playing some really arcane chords that don't mean anything to anybody. What really counts for me is making music that people like and understand. And the guitar is just a means to an end in that regard. Without a player and a musical mind attached to it, it's just a hunk of wood with some strings and it doesn't do anything for you. After looking at this all my life, I've really just come to the conclusion that the guitar is just, for me, a way of just getting a lot of notes to work together the simplest way they can. And one way is to make your tone last long and make your tone have a little life to it rather than just play a chord and stop and just let it sit. It doesn't mean anything then. A little vibrato can do a lot for a chord. A little sustain, which I achieve by just keeping a little of the top end off of the guitar, a little treble turned back, and a little mid-range is turned up. It makes the guitar a little mellower and sustains a little longer. If you put a lot of treble on, it just has an edge that I've never really liked. Anyway, having spoken about getting a little tone happening from the guitar, let's get in tune so when we play tones together, they don't scream at each other. Here's an E. Here's a B. Here's a G. And a D. Good. Let's talk about chords now for the guitar. The reason that I wanted to do this video is that chords have been my major interest in the guitar. I love playing solos as much as anybody else does, and I always felt that saxophone players like Cannonball Adderley and Train and other players, of course, are the people that I wanted to emulate, not so much guitar players. But as far as chords are concerned, I've sort of reduced the keyboard down to where there's only 3 basic chords, and they're triads. There's one that's the E chord that we've all played. When you play this configuration in your left hand, I'll refer to that in the future as an E configuration. Another one is the A configuration, which is that bar chord. And the C or D, that's the C chord. The smaller version of that is this chord. Those 3, E, A, and C, fingerings are the only real triads there are on the guitar, except for the minor variations of them. Anywhere you go up and down the neck, you're going to find that those triads are always showing. If you go just play a C chord in second position, you're still playing this A configuration. You've just moved it up to become a C chord and so forth. C sharp, E, G, and so forth. That's still using that A configuration. With the E configuration, the same thing applies. Just going up the neck becomes a G chord, a B flat, D flat, E flat. And with the C configuration, the same thing applies. It's just those chords are the three basic things that you use all over the guitar. As far as right-hand technique of playing these chords when you're moving them around, I like to use the pick when I'm playing solo or using a lot of chords. I use the pick mainly for my bass notes. So that's just playing this G. And my other three fingers that aren't holding the pick are now strumming the chord. And if you want to play a melody along with that, you can put the pick away and just let your thumb play the bass notes. Let your first and second fingers play the chords in the middle. And your third finger is now left free to play a melody note. If we're in a G chord, obviously our bass note is a G. On the D string and the G string, we have the basis of a G chord here, which is a G and a B. So now we've got the chord. Now the third fingers are available for any melody notes. We'll get into those chords in a little while. Anyway, I'd like to get everybody used to just moving the chords up and down the neck. And each time you use one and move one, make sure you know what it becomes after you've moved it. If you're using the A configuration, which is this, or you figure it this way, or any way you want to get those three notes, your E, A, and C sharp. Any way you want to move, finger those, wherever you move it, make sure you know what it's become. If you move it up there, it's become a C sharp chord. There it's become an E chord. Every time you come across an E chord now in some music that you might be reading, you may need to place in order to get to it, a different place on the neck. And that's where knowing those inversions starts to count. You may be reading a piece of music in a dance band situation or in any situation, and it says you need an E chord, but the last chord you played, chord up here. Now, if the only E chord you know is this one, it's going to be kind of a hard jump. So you want to know that A configuration version of the E chord, which is, now it's an E chord. So if you want to go from F to E, you want to do it there rather than, those kinds of jumps are the basis for the way I've learned to play chords. What happens for me is, in order to keep from making jumps like that, what you want to do is to start to insert common tones between all your chords. When you go from any chord to any other chord, if there's a possible common tone, you want to maintain it. When I'm going from an E6/9 chord, which is this chord, to a B13th chord, I want to keep maybe this B on top. Now, if I want to go to like a B minor chord, I want to still keep common tones. If I go back to an E chord now, I want to keep common tones. Now, where can I go from this to get to common tones and still have an E chord? The first thing that's going to change is the bass note. Now, I have an E chord already of a sort. It's an E sus chord. It's a B minor chord with an E bass, so it's a B sus. In order to get from that B minor to E properly, I want to change some A that's in this chord to a G sharp, so I have an E chord. Now all we did to change those two chords was let go of one note, which is this B bass. That went down to an E. And this A on the bottom of the triad changed to a G sharp. But the entire character of the chord is different. Now that 2-5 progression happens all over the guitar. It's really critical, as many notes as you can keep common to two chords, the closer the relationship, the better it's going to sound. Every chord had something in common with the chord that followed it. This is a set of changes that demonstrates keeping common tones from one chord to another. They originally are in a Chopin etude, and I think Jobim used them in his tune, How Insensitive. All of those chords are maintaining commonality with the preceding and the following chord. C minor 7th is the first one. Then we go to this G chord with a B bass. Here's your triad. Now that triad is based on this C configuration we talked about. There it is. We're putting the bass note here. And the reason for that is simply trying to keep common tones and be as chromatic as we can in the bass line. So we're starting C, B bass, B flat bass. Now that becomes an E flat chord with a B flat bass, and it's still the same C configuration, which is the basis of that chord. Now we're down to an F chord, same thing with an A bass. Now we just slip, everything stays the same except the bass note slides down a half step. Now that has just become an A flat 6th chord. There's your A flat chord, taken from the E configuration. It has an F in the middle of it. There's an A flat 6th, but we're just getting it to it from here. Now we're just going to take across and get a D flat bass, and it becomes a D flat major 7th chord. Nothing has changed except the bass note. Now we're going to just change two notes to a D half diminished and finish the phrase. Another way to start the phrase, the C minor chord, instead of this 7th chord, which is the simplest, easiest one, is to start with this. So you have your G and your E flat here, then down to a G here and a C in the bass. I like this chord because when you use it, your first finger can dictate the whole texture of the chord just by moving a half step. All of those things are the result of just feeling around for where a half step's motion will make a significant change. C minor, G over B, E flat over B flat, F over A flat 6th, D flat major 7th, D half diminished or minor 7 flat 5, G is C minor. Okay. In this set of chords, in this set of changes based on the Chopin, if you change, now we've been working on changing the bass notes and some interior notes. The same thing can be true of melody notes. All it is keeping the chord based where it belongs and just moving your melody or your top note around. Now that we've talked about how we can alter a chord by moving the melody around on top of it, let's see what happens if we keep the melody the same and let the chord change underneath. Let's start with the same C minor chord. Now we can move right down chromatically and keep that G on top. All those chords have a G on top. Started off with a C minor, then we went to a B augmented chord, B flat 13th, A 7th, A flat major 7th, G 13th, F sharp 13 flat 9, F 9, E plus 9, just an E flat 7th, D sus, and a D flat augmented 11th, and we're back to the C minor again. We've kept the G all the way through the 12 tones of the chromatic scale. The reason that's a good thing to do is when you're playing chord solos, you're often called on to play a given chord with a melody note that's not part of that chord. And it's good to be able to quickly grab a chord that includes any note as the top note. Hence, get all the way around the guitar, keeping a common tone. When we're just looking at a melody to harmonize, that's when that becomes a necessity. If we have, let's just pick a melody. That'll be our melody. There's a million ways to harmonize that. There's a ton of ways to just get chords under a melody. The trick is to know what you're going to hear when you play the chord. And as you look at these, as you listen to these melodies, you want to make sure that the chord you're thinking of playing is the chord that you want to hear. The only way to do that is to absolutely, when you practice your chords, when we have this melody, every chord that's going to be under one of those notes, make sure you hear every note in it. This way. Now that chord is like a C minor chord with a major 7th in it, C minor 9th. That's the actual chord, and there's the C bass note. Now we're just a plain C minor chord, E flat major 7th for that G note, and now we could play a C augmented for the C melody, and maybe a nice B flat sus chord for the B flat melody. There's a lot of ways of harmonizing any chord. Now there's the same melody, we've just changed the chord underneath it. This is now an E flat augmented 11th underneath it. Now it has a dominant 7th in it. These chords are all just substitutes for one another, and they're all based on these three configurations that we talked about at the beginning of this lesson. If we go to this melody now and just play it, tune out of something because now you have chords going with it. If we just, a way to achieve that goal, and the way I did it when I was learning to play the guitar, was just to find a chord that was easy to grab, and I really couldn't remember what ones were easy as a young person, but let's just call it a G, plain G chord, and start experimenting with what happens as we start to add and to take notes away from that. Just by moving one note, one finger. If we take our second finger off, obviously that becomes a G minor chord. If we take our fourth finger off, that becomes a G7th chord, and so on. Now you can get a little more adventurous. These are all just changing one note. Take a C minor chord. This is your basic C minor chord. Just change one note. Now you have a ninth in the chord. As long as you're listening to these chords so that you know exactly what they sound like before you play them, then you have a shot at harmonizing chords on the fly and making chord solos and melodies that are harmonized really musically and using the guitar to what I think is its fullest potential. Just playing a single note solo, not that it's easy, there's nothing easy about it, but to play it in harmony that has a sound of being preconceived is very difficult and requires a lot of paying attention as you practice your chords. So what I've done is when I play a chord, in my mind I'm hearing each one of those intervals before I actually play them. And then I try to visualize the sound of that chord as I play it. That means once I know what it's going to sound like, I can place it in a solo, and it won't sound just like random things. To do that, you just have to listen to the interior notes of all your chords. And one way of doing that is to play a scale. Just maybe, let's take a regular C scale. And let's just harmonize it. That's just in thirds, now in chords. Get down too low in the guitar, those triads are not going to speak, obviously, so I just stop them when they get a little muddy. Now, when you're harmonizing a major scale, you're going to obviously use... The first chord is going to be C major. You have a minor chord on your the second degree of the scale, D minor. Third degree of the scale, E minor. F, G, now A minor. Now we have a G minor, I'm sorry, G seventh, and a C chord to end it. Now another way to go about getting these chords in your mind, as you're doing that, sing each interval in the chord before you actually play it. And also, you want to be able to play the same chord in all of its inversions. Just in order to be able to grab a harmony note, melody note and a proper harmony, you have to be able to move not up and down the neck as much as across the neck, and that's why you need all of the different inversions. The same thing applies to your minor scale. A D minor scale harmonized like that. Harmonize all your scales like that, minor and major. And pretty soon there's really no harmony note, no melody note, and no harmony note that you can't grab, especially if you're trying to predict, as you play them, the sounds of each individual component of the chord. That's the key to this whole thing. When you hear a chord, break it up like that in your mind. This is just a C with a 9/8 suspension. I call it a 2 chord. Should be able to just sing every note in that before you hear them. As long as you can hear the notes before you play them, you're going to be able to grab everything that you want to grab. Before we stop talking in such general terms of harmonizing scales and stuff like that and get onto some specifics, I just want to talk a little bit about the relationship of a bass note to a chord. You can take, for instance, this B flat ninth chord. There's the B flat that would be played by a bass player probably. The very same, that's the chord. The very same chord, just let your E ring on the bottom, and it's become an entirely different chord. It's now an E flat 9. That happens with all chords as you play them. If you change the bass note only, the whole complexion of the chord is changed, obviously. Same thing if we have a, for instance, a C plus 9, is this one. If I add this F sharp in the bass, it's now become an F sharp 13th. That's the basis of an awful lot of jazz improvisation. If you see those kind of lines, they're all based on that flat 5 relationship where the chromatic scale of 12 tones is divided exactly in the middle, so that you have in the key of C, there's your octave. The dead center of that is F sharp, G flat. So now that C chord becomes interchangeable with that F sharp chord. I'll show you what I mean. It starts to become difficult to determine where the C tonality stops and the F sharp tonality begins. And that's how a lot of players, including myself, get to substitute chords in a song so that you're just not always playing the exact same progression. You can safely substitute chords of flat fifth away from each other if they're dominant chords. A C seventh, an F sharp seventh, with very slight alterations, become the same chord, and all that's changing is the bass note. That's an extremely simple explanation of a rather difficult concept. It takes a while and a little, you just have to listen as you try these experiments. For instance, if you're in the key of F, the basis of your F7th chord is an E flat, which is the 7th of F, and an A, which is the 3rd. Those two notes together form the basis of an F7 chord, and if I play an F bass, it's an unmistakably F7th chord. If I play a B bass, it's not an F7th anymore, it's a B7th. Nothing has changed but the bass note. Now in the larger frame, an F13th to a B13th, they become the same, they have the same accompanying value in a jazz sense. Those are all just moving flat fives. Another thing to think about when you're accompanying another soloist or harmonizing a melody is trying to get some motion where your melody may be moving in one direction and your bass notes may be moving in another direction, or some pattern that might work. There's one trick that I use. If you take this A chord and put a C sharp bass as your first chord, then you have a B chord with a C bass. I'm explaining these in terms of triads, not what they actually become. Just as a way to get up the neck you're not going to hear every day. I mean, when you hear that kind of a melodic line, you're not always going to hear that kind of a chord. And it's an easy, it lays on the guitar well, and if you're just bored and you want to play something interesting, that may be it. Now, ending up with this chord, in that configuration with a G bass, it's a G7 with a flat 9 chord. I'm sorry, with a plus 9 chord. And that chord has become the basis of an awful lot of my harmonizing things. If we bring it down from the top of the neck here where we can look at it a little closer, let's play it on the key of C. Put a C bass. Now that chord, if we start to alter it by little degrees, Now we're going to add that G sharp on top. It becomes an F sharp chord. There's your bass note. So now our C plus 9 has become an F sharp, and there's your flat 5 relationship again. That chord can be further altered. Play the top note, which is a C sharp here. And now you've got a larger F sharp 9th chord. Now if you flat the top note, we haven't changed any of these interior notes yet. We're just changing these two notes and not even together. Now we've got an F sharp augmented 11th, which also can be with a C bass, can be a C augmented. This chord, now we move another half step, and it becomes a flat 9 and a 13th at the same time based on C. Now it's augmented. Now we just slide down, and it becomes an F. And then you can just all of those things are keeping all the common tones we talked about in the beginning. And a specific example of a use of that chord in the key of F if you're playing the blues. Okay, we'll stop right there. This F ninth translates really quickly into this B flat ninth without a lot of finger motion. We're just taking these two fingers and moving them across the board. It's a very easy transition, and it's one way to get from the 1 chord to the 4 chord that doesn't sound like this. Everything is very closely tied. And we're back to F again. Now, as a preparation to go into the second half of the blues chord, which would be on a B flat, we can just slide this same thing up to that B chord we talked about before. And if I change my top note to F, it sounds like it's the same chord, but our bass note has changed. So now we've gone from F to B with all these common notes. Slide it right back down, everything except the top note. And now you're on your B flat for the second half of the blues chorus. So that would work like this. That's using the same chord an awful lot. But as the bass player is playing, every time he makes a chromatic change in his line, which he's bound to do, those chords take on a new meaning, and they have a new use and a new sound. So I rely an awful lot on how the bass player approaches going from, in this case, from F to B flat into the cycle of fifths. I rely on the bass player a great deal to dictate what the textures are going to be, but at the same time I'm using chords, especially those two chords, that can accept almost any bass note and still be harmonious with the surroundings. And that's the trick of getting the guitar to work like a piano. When you can play a chord that will accept a lot of bass notes and not sound it won't be clashing with everything. You've achieved a very large part of being harmonious with your musical surroundings. If you're playing chords, there's almost no options to what you're going to play with that. If you play anything but that D bass note on that chord, you got big troubles. But if you play your D chord like this, now you can play an A flat, an A, that. You can play F, you can play F sharp. Anything will work with those chords because they have intervals in them that allow that to happen. When you're too dictatorial with the triads, the bass players, or whatever you're trying to play on the bass, on the keyboard is severely limited. I'd like to talk a little bit about contrary motion again in melodies. At the end of this song, I'll play a tune that I wrote a while ago. This is on a CD of mine called Back to Beck. This is called Another Dawn, and at the end of the chorus, there's a little contrary motion that could be the beginning of a study for something. This little motion. Just with the bass going down, interior line going up. It's something you can translate up the neck. Also, while I'm doing it, I might as well show you this little harmonic thing if you don't already do it. Anytime you have a chord that has enough notes barred across, such as that A minor chord, you can touch the harmonic 12 frets away with the heel of your hand and let the pick just play right across the strings. It's just a little trick that I do a lot, and you may want to use it. You may not want to use it. You may have noticed at the end of phrases I often end with that little harmonic. The way I do that is to just brush the heel of my hand across the strings at exactly an octave away, the first harmonic, and let the pick do the rest. You can do it, you can get other harmonics also. If the chord is too spread out, like this A flat chord with the ninth in the middle, you can only get a couple of notes because there's nothing in a line that resembles the heel of your hand. So I use it a lot on a major seventh ending, on a minor chord, and like that. It's an easy technique, and it's a nice way to end a tune sometimes. Now, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of chords and what makes them up, how we name them, bass notes and how they relate to chords, a little bit of contrary motion discussion and melodies and changes and all that. None of it means too much if you're just going to sit in your room and do it and think about it. Eventually, you had to go out there and play it. And in order to apply these principles to your guitar, I'll show you how I apply them to a tune that we may know. This is called Darn That Dream, and I'll just harmonize it, and after I've played it, we'll talk about some of the applications as we used them in the tune. You know, that's applying most of the principles that we talked about into one song. In the first 8, I'm just trying to keep everything as close as I can. Now, when you're going from G major to B flat minor 11th, there's not a lot of common tones possible. So I just try to let it slide in and lead the tones that that aren't actually touching each other from chord to chord. Now the same thing, we're going to an A minor chord, we'll just let everything go down to that inversion. Now obviously that's a chord you can only use in that key, because we're utilizing the open B and open E string. That's a B with a flat 5 in the melody. Now we talked about these bass notes that are going down and the melodies staying the same. That's the same thing we did on the C minor with those Chopin changes. Now the next part, this melody, I use this chord. Now that's another chord that's only usable in this key. It's the A minor 9th, and we've doubled the 9th with an open B string. Now we go back to a C minor chord. Now that C minor is one of those chords we talked about that's so usable. It was an F 9th when we talked about it, with that bass note. With this bass note, it becomes a C minor 6 chord. And it's just, that's an eminently slidable chord, if such a thing exists. Then the rest of the phrase goes down to B minor. And at the end of that 8, I used another technique we talked about, which was chromatic bass lines going down with a common tone, and it was this. All with a D common to the chord for the whole turnaround of that first 8. At any rate, you could just see that the more you know about keeping voices leading properly and close to each other, the better shot you have at being able to harmonize a tune to your own liking and not letting the guitar dictate to you how it's going to sound. And to me, that, if there's one critical factor in my philosophy, if you will, of playing the guitar, is to try to avoid the guitar telling you what to do. And it's easy to have happen. The guitar can dictate by what's easy to grab, can dictate a lot of music that you might otherwise not want to play. If your ears are telling you what to do as opposed to the guitar, you've already solved half the problems that are inherent in playing this instrument. Now I'd like to just talk about solos, not a preconceived melody like we just heard, but solos that are harmonized in the style. Wes Montgomery was a great influence on us all for that. He was, in my mind, the best at it. In other words, now we're not talking about a complete bass note, chord, and melody combination. We're using the chords as the melody. In order to have this happen, you have to absolutely know what the chord sounds like before you play it. And that's where we go back to our talk about as you're practicing these chords, as we did on Darn That Dream. Just listen to the chord, make sure you can predict each one of those intervals and then the sound of that chord before you actually strum it. If you can do that, you have the chance of playing some pretty good chord solos. What I'll do is I'll just take a blues progression in F, and we'll just listen to some chord solos on that. hear the chord first, you got a shot at playing anything you want in a chorded fashion. And I spent a lot of time trying to organize chords into groups that work together. And I just hope I shed some light for you on how to achieve that. Just remember, the key to this whole thing of playing melodies and chords at the same time is to know what it sounds like before you play it. And that stems from sitting around when you're practicing and just listening very closely to what constitutes a chord and what happens when you vary it just 1 degree. Each one of those little changes can change the entire complexion of the chord and even change its key. I hope this has been a help to you, and all you have to do is just listen and you'll get better. Thanks a lot.